What is biogeochemical cycle? Biogeochemical cycle is a movement or cycling of matter through a system. And by matter we mean carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and water.
The term biogeochemical is a contraction that refers to the consideration of the biological, geological, and chemical aspects of each cycle involved in the circulation of essential elements of living matter. Elements within this cycle flow in diverse forms from abiotic components to the biotic components and back. Each cycle has a reservoir or a nutrient pool and an exchange or cycling pool. The nutrient pool is usually abiotic, while the cycling pool, which is the more active portion of the cycle, that is concerned with the rapid exchange between the biotic and abiotic aspects of an ecosystem.
There are 5 major types of biogeochemical cycles, namely the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and the sulfur cycle. Start with the water cycle. Water plays many different roles on the earth. Some is at the poles in ice caps, and some is in the snow and glaciers at top of high mountains. Some is in lakes and streams, and some is underground. Some is vapor in atmosphere, but most of the water on earth is in the oceans.
Where is water? The water cycle, also known as the hydrologic cycle, is a process by which water moves from place to place above, on, and below the Earth's surface. This is the process by which water moves around the Earth to different places. The total amount of water on the Earth is relatively unchanging, and it has remained about the same since our planet's formation. As the planet cooled, water vapor present at its formation condensed to fill the oceans in other places like inland lakes and rivers. The Earth's surface is 75% water and 25% land. Of the water, 97% is salt water, a surprisingly high percentage, leaving only 3% as fresh water. Most of that, 2/3 of the fresh water on Earth, is frozen in snow and ice in glaciers, ice caps, and the like. That leaves only about 1% of all the Earth's water as liquid and fresh, making it a very scarce natural resource. And if that wasn't enough, most of the liquid fresh water is stored underground in aquifers. Groundwater is just what the word sounds like, water stored under the surface of the Earth. But like rocks or other types of matter, water in the Earth is not static. It constantly is moving around the hydrosphere, which is the layer of the Earth where water is present. Moves around by changing in 3 different processes that make up the water cycle.
Let's begin the water cycle journey with water on the surface of the earth. Evaporation. Evaporation is the process by which water is converted from its liquid state to the gaseous state, also known as water vapor. In other words, water leaves the earth's surface and enters the atmosphere as a gas. Next is condensation. Condensation is the process by which water vapor is changed back into liquid water. Condensation is very important to our weather and climate because it is responsible for cloud formation, and without clouds we would not get to the 3rd phase, called precipitation. Precipitation is the process that occurs when any all forms of water particles fall from the atmosphere and reach the ground. Precipitation creates surface runoff that travels over the ground surface and helps to fill the lakes and rivers.
Aside from that, precipitation also interrupts the movement of water in the chain of transportation events, leading to the streams by a process called interception. This can take place by vegetal cover depression, storage in puddles, and inland formations such as rills and furrows.
Then, infiltration. Infiltration is the physical process involving movement of water through a boundary area where the atmosphere interfaces with the soil. Happens simultaneously with percolation. Percolation is the movement of water through the soil and its layers by gravity and capillary forces. From the topsoil, the water travels down in spaces of rock particles down to the bedrock until it reaches the deep ground aquifers. Consequently, groundwater also travels here laterally and end up discharging towards the lakes or the sea. The carbon cycle. Carbon is what makes an organic molecule organic or living. It is necessary for synthesis of various molecules such as carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Both plants and animals release carbon dioxide when they decompose, as well as when organic matters like woods, leaves, or oil are burned. When carbon dioxide is released, it goes through the atmosphere where it is taken in by plants, which is consumed by animals. There are 6 processes that drive the carbon cycle, namely photosynthesis, respiration, exchange, sedimentation, extraction, and combustion. Photosynthesis is a physico-chemical process by which plants, algae, and photosynthetic bacteria use light energy to drive the synthesis of organic compounds. In plants, algae, and certain types of bacteria, the photosynthetic process results in the release of molecular oxygen and the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that is used to synthesize carbohydrates. Photosynthesis provides the energy and reduced carbon required for the survival of virtually all life on our planet, as well as the molecular oxygen necessary for the survival of oxygen-consuming organisms.
Next is respiration. Respiration consists of a complicated series of chemical reactions. In the first state, glucose is oxidized, and the chemical potential energy of its bond is transferred to the chemical potential bonds of an ATP molecule. The ATP molecule can then be transported throughout the cell, where its stored energy is used to complete various tasks within the cell. This process releases carbon dioxide gas and water. Respiration occurs in your cells and is fueled by the oxygen you inhale. The carbon dioxide gas you exhale is a result of a completed cycle of cellular respiration. Next up, exchange. Carbon dioxide leaves the atmosphere through photosynthesis, thus entering the terrestrial and oceanic biospheres. Carbon dioxide also dissolves directly from the atmosphere into bodies of water, as well as dissolving in precipitation as raindrops fall through the atmosphere. When dissolved in water, carbon dioxide reacts with water molecules and forms carbonic acid, which contributes to ocean acidity. It can then be absorbed by rocks through weathering. It also can acidify other surfaces it touches or be washed into the ocean.
Then, sedimentation. Sedimentation is the tendency for particles in suspension to settle out of the fluid in which they are entrained and come to rest against a barrier. This is due to their motion through the fluid in response to the forces acting on them. These forces can be due to gravity, centrifugal acceleration, or electromagnetism.
There are 3 primary types of fossil fuels that are extracted: coal, oil, and natural gas. Coal is a hard, black substance found close to the Earth's surface or mined from deep in the ground. There are over 2,000 mines in the United States from which more than 800,000 tons of coal are removed each year, supplying approximately 1,566 coal-burning electric power plants. Coal is responsible for providing much of the energy for producing electricity. In fact, there are currently 94 new coal-burning power plants that have been proposed, which would approximately power 62 million homes. Lastly, combustion. Combustion or burning is a high-temperature exothermic redox chemical reaction between a fuel and an oxidant, usually atmospheric oxygen, that produces oxidized, often gaseous products In the mixture termed as smoke, combustion in a fire produces a flame, and the heat produced can make combustion self-sustaining. During this process, carbon enters the atmosphere as carbon dioxide.
The nitrogen cycle.
Another important aspect of life is nitrogen. Nitrogen is required for all organisms to grow because it is an essential component of DNA, RNA, and protein. However, it is also one of the most complex because nitrogen exists in numerous forms and all are part of the nitrogen cycle since it must be fixed or converted into a usable form.
There are four processes that participate in nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen fixation. Approximately 80% of the atmosphere is nitrogen gas. Unfortunately, nitrogen is unusable by most living organisms. Plants, animals, and microorganisms can die of nitrogen deficiency. All organisms use the ammonia form of nitrogen to manufacture amino acids, proteins, nucleic acids, and other nitrogen-containing components necessary for life. Biological nitrogen fixation is a process that changes inert nitrogen gas to biological useful ammonia. This process is mediated in nature only by bacteria. Other plants benefits from nitrogen-fixing bacteria when bacteria die and release nitrogen to the environment or when the bacteria live in close association with the plant.
In legumes and a few other plants, the bacteria live in small growths on the roots called nodules. Within these nodules, nitrogen fixation is done by the bacteria Rhizobium, and the ammonia produced is absorbed by the plant. Nitrogen fixation by legumes is a partnership between a bacterium and a plant. Biological nitrogen fixation can take many forms in nature, including blue-green algae, lichens, and free living soil bacteria. These types of nitrogen fixation contribute significant quantities of ammonia to natural ecosystems.
Decomposition. The proteins made by plants enter and pass through food webs just as carbohydrates do. At each trophic level, their metabolism produces organic nitrogen compounds that return to the environment, chiefly in excretions. The final beneficiaries of these materials are microorganisms of decay, which break down nitrogenous wastes and organic matter found in animal waste and dead plants and animals and convert it into inorganic ammonia for absorption by plants as ammonium ions. This process is also called ammonification. It is carried out by a diverse array of microorganisms that perform ecological decay services, and its product is ammonia or ammonium ion. Ammonium is a suitable source of nutrition for many species of plants, especially those living in acidic soils. However, most plants cannot utilize ammonium effectively, and they require nitrate as their essential source of nitrogen nutrition.
Nitrification. Nitrification is a microbial process by which reduced nitrogen compounds, primarily ammonia, are sequentially oxidized to nitrate and nitrite. Ammonia is present in drinking water through either naturally occurring processes or through ammonia addition during secondary disinfection to form chloramines. The nitrification process is primarily accomplished by two groups of autotrophic nitrifying bacteria that can build organic molecules using energy obtained from inorganic sources, in this case ammonia or nitrite. In the first step of nitrification, ammonia oxidizing bacteria oxidize ammonia to nitrite. Nitrosomonas is the most frequently identified genus associated with this step. Other genera, including Nitrosococcus and Nitrospira, can also autotrophically oxidize ammonia. In the second step of the process, nitrite oxidizing bacteria oxidize nitrite to nitrate. Nitrobacter is the most frequently identified genus associated with this second step, although other genera, including Nitrospina, Nitrococcus, and Nitrospira, can also autotrophically oxidize nitrite. Various groups of heterotrophic bacteria and fungi can also carry out nitrification, although at a slower rate than autotrophic organisms. Denitrification. Denitrification is the biological conversion of nitrate to nitrogen gas, nitric oxide, and nitrous oxide. These compounds are gaseous compounds and are not readily available for microbial growth. Therefore, they are typically released to the atmosphere. Nitrogen gas makes up over 70% of atmospheric gases. Thus, the release of nitrogen gas to the atmosphere is benign. Biological denitrification is an anaerobic respiration reaction in which nitrate is reduced. Denitrifying bacteria are aerobic autotrophs or heterotrophs that can switch to anaerobic growth when nitrate is used as an electron acceptor. Denitrification can occur by two pathways, the dissimilative nitrate reduction pathway or the assimilative pathway. The denitrification process partially reverses the effects of nitrification process in regards to alkalinity concentration. Pseudomonas, Bacillus, and Spirillum are among the denitrifiers that are ubiquitous and commonly found in natural soils and wetlands and environments.
The sulfur cycle describes the movement of sulfur through the atmosphere, mineral forms, and through living things. Although sulfur is primarily found in sedimentary rocks or seawater, it is particularly important to living things because it is a component of many proteins. Sulfur is released from geologic sources through the weathering of rocks. Once sulfur is exposed to the air, it combines with oxygen and becomes sulfate. Plants and microbes assimilate sulfate and convert it into organic forms. As animals consume plants, the sulfur is moved through the food chain and released when organisms die and decompose. Sulfur is also released into the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels, especially high sulfur coal, and it is also a primary constituent of acid rain. Sulfur-containing proteins are degraded into their constituent amino acids by the action of a variety of soil organisms. The sulfur of the amino acids is converted to a hydrogen sulfide by another series of soil microbes. In the presence of oxygen, hydrogen sulfide is converted to sulfur and then sulfate by sulfur bacteria. Eventually, the sulfate becomes hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide rapidly oxidizes the gases that dissolve in water to form sulfurous and sulfuric acids. These compounds contribute a large part of the acid rain that can kill sensitive aquatic organisms and damage marble monuments and stone buildings. The phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is an element that is found in the ground and then taken up by plants and animals. Phosphorus starts its existence as phosphate ions in the rocks of the world. When it remains, the phosphates and other minerals are removed from the rocks and distributed in soils and the water all over the planet. Over time, rain and weathering cause rocks to release phosphate ions and other minerals. This inorganic phosphate is then distributed in soils and water. Plants take up inorganic phosphate from the soil. The plants may then be consumed by animals. Once in the plant or animal, the phosphate is incorporated into organic molecules such as DNA. When the plant or animal dies, it decays, and the organic phosphate is returned to the soil. Within the soil, organic forms of phosphate can be made available to plants by bacteria that break down organic matter to inorganic forms of phosphorus. This process is known as mineralization. Phosphorus in soil can end up in waterways and eventually oceans. Once there, it can be incorporated into sediments over time. However, phosphorus is mostly not readily available to plants since most of our phosphorus is locked up in sediments and rocks. In addition, crops are usually harvested and removed, leaving no decaying vegetation to replace phosphorus. Therefore, farmers replenish the phosphorus pool by adding fertilizers. But when fields are over-fertilized, phosphate not utilized by plants can be lost from the soil through leaching and water runoff. Excess phosphate causes excessive growth of plants in waterways, lakes, and estuaries, leading to eutrophication.
Although we have introduced each of the major biogeochemical cycles independently, they are all linked in various ways. In specific cases, they are linked through their common membership in compounds that form an important component of their cycles. In general, cycled nutrients are all components of living organisms and constituents of organic matter. As a result, they travel together in their odyssey through internal cycling.